So if you ever find yourself at this stage where you're replacing some used gears or rebuilding an axle and resetting those gears, if you're cheap and stubborn like me, you're trying to do it yourself and you don't want to pay anybody else to do it. Because as if setting up regular new gears wasn't hard enough, setting up used gears can be even more of a challenge. You're trying to set up gears that have already taken a seat and they have some wear on them. It can't be excessive wear, otherwise the gears are shot. So that decreases your window of adequacy on trying to get these gears set. Now this is coming from somebody who has no real gear setting experience. I've done a couple of axles in the past with good results, knock on wood, and this is just my experience and what you have to go through to actually get this successfully done. The first axle I reset the gears in was an AMC 20 out of my Jeep, and a lot of people advised against it, but I spent like a week and a half messing with it and I eventually got it, so some persistence pays off. And it goes for regular new sets of gears that you're putting in as well. You gotta have patience and be willing to take things apart again and again and again to actually, get to a result that you're happy with. If you give up or you say, it's close enough, that's what's going to end up biting you. So you might as well just accept the fact that you're going to have this pinion in and out of here a dozen times, resetting shims, setting the backlash again and again. Now on this axle we've got these adjusters here, but a lot of times you're dealing with the shims. Maybe the gears are still in the vehicle and it's awkward and it's usually like 90 degrees out, and yeah, fun times. So of course you need a clean working surface. Having a bearing puller definitely makes this job, well, a lot easier, but less likely to damage the bearings. Believe me, I've done a lot more with a lot less, and you do run the risk of screwing up a perfectly good bearing, so keep that in mind. Nothing the press can't handle. Got a magnetic base. Now you can always rig up something with a C-clamp on the here or what have you. I mean, dial indicators are cheap enough. I mean, heck, I got this one out of the trash, but gets the job done for what we need. This little spanner wrench helps out a lot on those. Now if you're rebuilding an axle, and take some backlash measurements ahead of time so you can use that as a starting point to go again. Mark both your bearing caps so you know what orientation they're in, or you can forget about taking that backlash reading like I've done and have to start really from scratch. So there's the offending bearing in this case. Well, now that you have all that apart, you want to pull out those races with the proper equipment. So if you're taking apart an axle that's already together, one of the most important things to keep track of is the shim that's under this pinion bearing here. If you can get it. So this set the initial pinion depth, and this will be a good starting point to start with your new gear pattern to check things out. Now, I've never been lucky enough to just throw in the stock shims and it works. I mean, the bearing tolerances are supposed to be pretty close, but something always ends up being off that I have to redo everything. So here we go on the first run with the stock setup, stock shim underneath the pinion bearing. And there's the coast side. I mean, at least it's on there. Coming around to the drive side, we're not even on the map. Maybe a little bit way down at the bottom. So figures, put it all back together stock, and we're way off, so we've got to start from scratch. So the first round of changes, we took some shim out of the pinion there, and it got worse, so we went the other way now. So now we have more, about 5 thousandths more than the stock shim that was in there, and we're actually getting some pattern now, so I'd say we're going in the right direction. Keep on going. So here's a tip for you. Never finish one of these jobs at the end of a long night in the shop. Your acceptance levels have surely dropped at that point. Sleep on it, come back the next day, and then see if you're happy with it. nothing good comes from compromising with a gear wear pattern like this. It's better to just do it another 3 times and get it right than to call it close enough and, you know, surely regret it. Now I'm sure I'll probably take flack for this, but I've had terrible luck getting these crush sleeves started being compressed whenever you're actually putting the pinion nut on. It takes a ton of torque to get them started crushing. So I've always taken some measurements ahead of time to see how much slop you got on the pinion when you got it just kind of set in there with hand tight with the nut. And you get that measurement and you go get close to it, but you know, obviously less than it. Crush it down just a bit, you know, so you still have to preload it with the nut, but start it with a press or heck, a hammer or something. But it takes a ton of torque, a ton of force to get this thing moving. Well, more than that, my 20-ton press has a tough time getting this thing started to compress. Once it gets going, it's a lot easier. Now these crush sleeves, these are supposed to be one use. Supposed to be. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, in previous times I've screwed up and needed a mulligan on setting that pinion preload. If you actually slide these over a piece of pipe or bar or whatever and hammer right on the deformed portion here, you can kind of straighten them out a little bit more, and you can recompress them. That's actually what's running in my Jeep right now. So I mean, I'm sure it's not the best practice, but when it's 2 in the morning and you need to get it done, it can get you by in a pinch. Now, one thing I've read up on, you know, some advice and tips you get for redoing these gears is people take an old bearing and they'll sand out the inside a little bit to get a nice smooth you know, slip fit on the pinion and stuff. And while that makes the whole disassembly and reassembly a lot easier of these parts, it kind of defeats the whole purpose of actually setting it up to the bearings that are in there. I mean, we didn't change anything except bearings in this diff, and it was way off. So I can't see how making a cheater set of bearings, I mean, maybe it would get you in the ballpark, but I don't think it would get you the whole way home. Now make sure you thoroughly clean everything before you put it back together. So I guess my ending advice for anybody wanting to do this is go for it, but go into it with the expectations of having to put some work in on it. It's not going to come easy. Maybe you'll get lucky. I never do. But, you know, if you're willing to have some patience and work at it until you can get the results that you need, anybody can do it. Granted, maybe you might get some screwed up gears. I mean, there's a chance and you'll never get a pattern set right. I guess you're screwed in that case, but you know, for the most part, if they were working when they came out, they should be working when they go back in.